Most people are walking through life completely defenseless, and the predators around them know it. Right now, somewhere in your world, there is a person who smiles at you in the morning and quietly stabs you in the back before noon. They play the game dirty because they've learned something most people never will, that good people hesitate, good people second guess themselves, and good people lose. But here's what nobody is telling you. Being a good person has absolutely nothing to do with being weak. The moment someone decides to make you their target, you have a choice. You either become a student of their own game, or you become their next casualty. Today, we're not talking about revenge. We're not talking about becoming them. We're talking about something far more dangerous to your enemies. We're talking about control. 10 mental tricks forged in behavioral science and human psychology that will shift the power back to exactly where it belongs, with you. Most people, when attacked, when cornered, when someone plays dirty with them, do the one thing that costs them everything. They talk, they explain, they defend, they justify, they send the long message, they make the phone call, they pull someone aside and spend 45 minutes laying out their case like a lawyer who wasn't hired to win, but hired to lose slowly and publicly. And every single word they say, it's ammunition, handed over freely, gift-wrapped, with a bow on top. Here's what the most psychologically powerful people in the world understand that the average person never figures out. Silence is not the absence of power. Silence is the power. When someone comes at you dirty, when someone lies about you, manipulates the room, twists your words, or tries to corner you into a reaction, the instinct is to correct them immediately. The instinct is to set the record straight. That instinct is exactly what they are counting on. They have built the trap specifically for that instinct. The moment you open your mouth to defend yourself, you have already stepped inside it. Think about what silence actually does to a person who is used to getting a reaction. They throw the punch and hit nothing. No resistance, no impact. No confirmation that they landed anything at all. A dirty player feeds on your response. They monitor your tone. They study your face. They listen for the tremor in your voice that tells them they got to you. When you give them nothing, not anger, not sadness, not explanation, not even a visible breath of frustration, you have just taken away the only tool they came equipped with. They brought a weapon designed for a specific kind of person. You just refuse to be that person. Silence forces the other party to sit inside their own actions. When you respond, you give them something to work with, a counter-argument to dismantle, an emotion to mock, a statement to twist. When you say nothing, they are left alone with what they did. There is no distraction, no back and forth to hide behind, just them and the weight of their own move sitting in the room. And for a person who plays dirty, that discomfort is unbearable. They are not built for stillness. They are built for chaos. And chaos requires two participants. You just became unavailable. This is not about being cold. It is not about being passive. It is not about letting things go or pretending nothing happened. Silence is a deliberate, strategic, psychologically precise choice. It communicates more than words ever could. It says, without saying anything, that you are not threatened, that you are not scrambling, that you are operating from a place so far above their level of game that responding would actually be beneath you. And people feel that. The room feels that. Even the dirty player feels that, which is precisely why it unsettles them far more than any argument you could construct. There is a concept in behavioral psychology around power and reaction time. The person who reacts fastest is almost always the person with the least control. Speed of reaction signals emotional activation. It signals that the other person got in. Slow, measured, or absent response signals the opposite, that you processed what happened, decided it was not worth the energy of a visible reaction, and chose to keep your composure entirely intact. That is not weakness. That is a level of psychological discipline that most people spend their entire lives never reaching. When someone who plays dirty realizes that their move produced absolutely nothing, no visible wound, no public drama, no emotional explosion they can point to, they are forced into one of two positions. They either escalate, which exposes them further and makes their pattern visible to everyone watching, or they retreat, because the game is no longer giving them what they came for. Either way, you win without having spent a single word. You have made them spend their energy while you have conserved yours entirely, and in any long game, which this always is, the person with the most energy left at the end is always the one who walks out ahead. There is a moment, and you have lived it, you know exactly what it feels like, where someone walks into your space completely unraveled. Not just upset, not just difficult, fully chaotic. Their voice is sharp, their energy is scattered, their words are coming at you like they were loaded into a cannon and fired without aim. And everything inside you, every biological wire you were born with, tells you to match it, to rise, to fight fire with fire, to meet that energy at its level, because anything less feels like surrender. That feeling is one of the most expensive instincts a human being can act on. Chaos is not just an emotional state. Chaos is a strategy. Maybe the person using it does not know it consciously. Maybe they have simply learned over years and years that when they turn up the temperature, people around them melt. They have learned that their disorder becomes everyone else's disorder, that their panic spreads, that their anger triggers anger, that their instability somehow becomes the room's instability. And once that happens, once you are inside their chaos with them, they have already won. Not because they were right, not because they were stronger, but because they pulled you off your foundation and onto theirs, and their foundation is the one thing in this entire situation they know better than you do. The most dangerous thing you can do to a chaotic person is stay calm, not performatively calm. Not the kind of manufactured, tight-jawed, visibly straining calm that is really just suppressed panic wearing a mask. Genuinely, quietly, almost boringly calm. The kind of calm that does not react to raised voices by raising yours. The kind that does not speed up its breathing when the room gets hot. The kind that looks at chaos the way a surgeon looks at blood, not as something alarming, but simply as information about what is happening that must be dealt with methodically and without drama. When you mirror someone's energy, you are not copying their behavior. Mirroring in its true psychological form means you are reflecting back their frequency at a lower, steadier, more controlled register. You acknowledge what is happening without being consumed by it. You respond at the pace you choose, not the pace they are trying to impose on you. You speak at the volume that serves the conversation, not the volume that serves their need for escalation. And what this does, slowly and almost invisibly, is it begins to pull the entire interaction back towards your register instead of theirs. This is called co-regulation, and it is one of the most powerful interpersonal dynamics that exists between two human nervous systems. The human nervous system is wired to synchronize. When two people are in close proximity, in a conversation, in a conflict, one nervous system will eventually begin to follow the other. The question is always, whose leads? A person who has trained themselves to remain grounded under pressure, who has practiced sitting inside discomfort without letting it detonate them, will almost always become the regulating force in that interaction. Their steadiness becomes a kind of gravitational pull. The chaotic person, even without realizing it, begins to slow down. Their voice drops slightly. Their sentences become less fragmented. They start to match your rhythm because your rhythm is the stronger, more stable signal in the room. This is why losing your composure against a dirty player is never just an emotional loss. It is a tactical loss. The second you meet their chaos with your own, you have handed them the one thing they were trying to extract. Proof that they have power over your internal state. That is the real objective of someone who weaponizes chaos. They are not trying to win an argument. Arguments can be lost and recovered from. They are trying to destabilize you. They are trying to make you perform your own undoing in front of anyone who is watching. Understanding this reframes the entire situation. Their chaos is not something you need to solve or match or overpower. It is simply a test of your ability to remain anchored to yourself when everything around you is designed to pull you loose. The person who can stay in their own energy, who can move slowly through a fast situation, who can lower their voice when someone else raises theirs, that person controls the entire interaction from beginning to end without ever once needing to fight for that control. There is something that happens to a person the moment they believe they are being observed. Something shifts. The calculation changes. The boldness that was so easy to access in private, in the dark, in the spaces where they believed no one was paying attention, it starts to compress. It pulls back. Because dirty players, without exception, are creatures of low visibility. They do not operate in the open. They do not make their moves in broad daylight where everything can be documented, witnessed, and remembered. They survive and thrive specifically in the gaps, the conversations that were never recorded, the moments no one else saw, the version of events that only exists in their retelling because no one else was there to contradict it. This is the architecture of how people who play dirty actually function. They are not brave. Bravery implies a willingness to be seen, to be held accountable, to stand behind what you did without needing shadows to hide inside. A dirty player is fundamentally a coward operating inside a very specific set of conditions that make their behavior feel safe to them. Remove those conditions. Specifically, remove the sense that no one is watching. And the entire structure of how they operate begins to destabilize. You do not need to expose them publicly to do this. You do not need to make announcements or wage campaigns. You simply need to make them feel, in whatever way is available to you, that someone is always paying attention. This is grounded in one of the most replicated findings in social psychology. The mere perception of being watched changes human behavior at a fundamental level. Studies on what researchers call the observer effect in social contexts have shown repeatedly that people behave more carefully, more honestly, and with greater restraint when they believe eyes are on them, even when those eyes are not real, even when the observation is implied rather than confirmed. A dirty player's confidence is built on the assumption that they are invisible. The moment that assumption is threatened, even slightly, even without proof, the confidence begins to erode. What this looks like in practice is quieter and more precise than most people imagine. It is not about surveillance or confrontation or dramatic revelation. It is about small, deliberate signals that communicate awareness. It is the way you reference something they thought slipped by unnoticed. It is the calm acknowledgement of a detail they assumed was buried. It is asking a question that you should not logically be able to ask unless you know more than they thought you did. It is the look that lasts a second too long, the response that is slightly too specific, the moment where they realize that the gap they thought they were operating inside may not have been a gap at all, and that recalculation, that sudden internal audit of every move they have made, is one of the most psychologically disruptive experiences you can create for someone who has been playing dirty. The reason this works at such a deep level is because a dirty player is always running a background calculation about risk. Every move they make is preceded by an unconscious assessment of exposure. How much can be traced back? How much can be denied? How much plausible deniability exists if things go sideways? That calculation depends entirely on the belief that their exposure is low. When you introduce doubt into that calculation, when you make it even slightly unclear how much you actually know, the math changes. And when the math changes, the behavior changes with it. They slow down. They second guess. They become cautious in exactly the moments they used to be most aggressive, because aggression requires confidence, and confidence requires the certainty of invisibility they no longer fully have. There is also a longer psychological consequence to this that compounds over time. A person who begins to feel watched, who begins to suspect that their moves are not as invisible as they believed, starts to experience something that functions almost like paranoia. Not in a clinical sense, but in the practical sense that their mental energy begins to redirect. Instead of focusing outward on how to continue their game, they begin focusing inward on what is already known, who knows it, what can be proven, and how to manage the narrative they previously did not need to manage at all. That internal redirect is cognitively expensive. It consumes attention, energy, and strategic bandwidth that they use to spend entirely on targeting you. You have not confronted them. You have not accused them. You have simply made the environment feel less safe, and in doing so, you have moved the battlefield from outside them to inside them, which is precisely where you want it. There is an economy running beneath every conflict you have ever been in, and most people never see it. It is not an economy of words or actions or even outcomes. It is an economy of emotional response, of reaction, of the visible, measurable, undeniable proof that what someone did to you actually landed. And in this economy, your reaction is the currency. It is what gets spent, collected, traded, and hoarded. It is what the entire operation is built around extracting from you. And the moment you understand that, truly understand it at the level where it changes how you move, you stop being a target and start being a problem that cannot be solved. A person who plays dirty is not, at their core, trying to win an argument or correct a situation or even destroy you in any final sense. What they are trying to do, beneath all the tactics and manipulation and performance, is feel powerful. And the way they feel powerful is by producing a reaction in you that confirms their power exists. Your anger confirms it. Your tears confirm it. Your visible frustration, your public defense of yourself, your desperate attempts to set the record straight, every single one of these responses is a deposit into their account. Every time you react, you are telling them the investment was worth it. You are telling them the move worked. You are giving them the one thing that makes all of it feel justified and worth repeating. This is why the most psychologically sophisticated response to a dirty player is also the one that feels the most counterintuitive. Every instinct you have says react, fight back, defend yourself, show them you are not afraid, show the room you are not broken, but showing anything is the problem. The moment you show, you have confirmed. And confirmation is the entire point of their operation. They are not throwing rocks because they enjoy the physical act of throwing. They are throwing rocks to see if you flinch, stop flinching, and the rocks eventually stop coming. Not because they became better people, but because the behavior stopped producing the return it was designed to produce. Behavioral psychology has a term for this: extinction. When a behavior stops being reinforced, it extinguishes. It does not always happen immediately. In fact, in the early stages of withholding reaction, you will often see the behavior intensify before it fades. This is called an extinction burst, and it is the most critical moment to understand. When a dirty player suddenly gets no reaction from you, their first move is not to stop. Their first move is to escalate, to push harder, to try a bigger move, a more public move, a more aggressive move, because somewhere in their wiring they believe that if they can just find the right lever, the reaction will come. If you hold through that escalation, if you remain completely unreadable and unmoved through the most intense version of their behavior, the system collapses. There is no lever, there is no return, there is nothing here to collect, and they will feel that absence with a clarity that no confrontation could ever produce. What starving someone of reaction requires is not indifference. It is not emotional numbness or the absence of feeling. You will feel things. You will feel the anger and the frustration and the very human desire to make them understand what they did. Feeling those things is not the failure. Performing them is. The discipline is in processing internally what you refuse to display externally. It is in building enough space between stimulus and response that your response becomes a choice rather than a reflex. That space, that gap between what they did and what you show, is where your power lives. And every time you successfully protect that space, it grows wider and more stable, until eventually their moves do not even threaten it anymore. There is also a social dimension to this that operates simultaneously and often more powerfully than the direct dynamic between you and the dirty player. Other people are watching. They are always watching. And what observers read is not the story of who started what or who was technically right. What they read is composure. They read who remained steady and who came apart. They read who needed the reaction and who was completely self-contained. A person who can absorb attack without visible damage does not look like a victim. They look like someone with reserves so deep that what just happened did not even come close to reaching them. That perception, built quietly over time through nothing more than consistent non-reaction, becomes a form of social armor that no dirty player can penetrate from the outside because it was built entirely from the inside. Every conflict, every betrayal, every dirty move made against you exists in two places simultaneously. It exists in reality, in what actually happened, in the facts, in the sequence of events as they truly unfolded, and it exists in the story, in the version that gets told, retold, shaped, and repeated until it becomes the thing people believe regardless of what actually occurred. Most people invest everything into the first place. They protect the facts, they gather the evidence, they build the airtight case, and while they are doing all of that, someone else is already busy constructing the story. And by the time the person with the facts arrives to present them, the story has already settled into people's minds like concrete that has had time to cure. This is the most underestimated battlefield in any conflict involving a dirty player. They almost always move on narrative before they move on anything else because they understand something instinctively that their targets rarely figure out in time. Perception does not wait for truth. Perception forms fast, often in the first few moments after information arrives, and once it forms, it does not update easily. The human brain is not a scale that weighs evidence objectively. It is a pattern recognition machine that latches onto the first coherent story it receives and then filters everything that comes after through that lens. First narrative in wins. Not because it is more accurate, because it arrived first and filled the space before anything else could. Reframing the narrative does not mean lying. It does not mean spinning or manipulating or doing to them what they are doing to you. It means understanding that the story of what is happening needs to be shaped by you, from your position, with your framing, before the alternative version has time to calcify. It means deciding how this situation is going to be understood and then communicating that understanding deliberately, clearly, and early. Not defensively, because defense implies you are responding to someone else's frame that has already taken hold, proactively, before the other version exists in the room at a level that requires dismantling. The language you use when you frame a narrative carries an enormous amount of weight. Dirty players almost always frame themselves as responding to your behavior, to a situation you created, to something you did first. They position themselves inside a reactive story because reactive stories generate sympathy. Nobody roots against someone who is simply defending themselves. When you reframe, you shift the sequence. You establish context. You make visible the pattern that their single incident framing deliberately obscures. Because a dirty player never wants the pattern seen. They want each move evaluated in isolation, where it can be explained away. Your job is to make the pattern the story, because patterns cannot be explained away, and they are almost impossible to unsee once they have been clearly named. There is also a timing element to this that most people get wrong. They wait until they feel ready, until they have processed everything emotionally, until they feel they can speak about it calmly and completely. That waiting, however understandable, is strategically catastrophic. Every hour the other version of events exists unchallenged is an hour it spends consolidating inside the minds of the people whose perception matters. You do not need to have everything figured out to establish your frame early. You need enough to plant the right questions in people's minds because questions disrupt the settling process. A narrative that people are questioning is a narrative that has not yet hardened, and a narrative that has not yet hardened can still be shaped. Whoever speaks the truth of a situation in the most compelling, human, and early delivered way controls how that situation is understood, remembered, and ultimately judged by everyone who was not there to witness it themselves. There is a particular kind of pride that destroys people in conflict. It is the pride that cannot tolerate the idea of not responding immediately, not matching every move, not making sure the